tell me whether or not you consider yourself pro or anti-union, and to support your opinion with 2 sources. I don't care if it's APA citation, so long as you give me your sources that you used and write your own opinion. It can be a couple of sentences, well written, and that will suffice for the assignment. So the other things that we talked about in terms of the negotiations, there will never be Monday assignments due in this class as per our work rules. So guys, we're going to start off today with a review of Chapter 1 before we get into Chapter 2. And we also have some context we're going to be setting today for the modern labor movement. I had a really opportunity to watch an interview with a kind of an up-and-comer in the labor movement this weekend. I liked it so much we're including it in class today. Part of your Labor Day class, because everybody is not excited about being in class on Labor Day, we're at least going to offset your experience here by watching a video, something that will be relevant to our experience and hopefully interesting as well. So guys, let's go ahead and do a Chapter 1 review. I'm going to be asking you a question. Some of these are true and false, some are multiple choice. So true or false, guys? Generally speaking, company managers are welcome in unions. Is that true or false? That is false. In fact, unions are intended to set lines between labor and management. If the employees are choosing to negotiate with employers as a group, is that unionizing, racketeering, collective bargaining, or collective action? Which is the best answer? C. C is correct, because you technically could collectively bargain even if you weren't a union. Now, unions organize primarily for the purpose of collective bargaining. Work rules include all but the following: hours of employment, overtime rules, shift differentials, or recruiting literature. Which doesn't fit? D is correct. Work rules are all about what your rules of employment are. Recruiting literature has no place in work rules because that would be something you would read before you even came on board in the first place. All the following are reasons why the union workforce is declining, except what? Is it A, more white-collar and professional professions? Professional professions, that's too many professionals in one line. Decline in trades, employer enthusiasm for higher minimum wage, or low unemployment rate, which is not a reason that union workforce is declining. It's a tricky question. I'll give you a hint. Are employers enthusiastic about paying higher minimum wages? I would think not. If you're an employer, you want to pay people as little as you can. There's a push these days for a $15 minimum wage. We're going to have a debate about that as well. So the reason that the union workforce is declining, well, more people are white collar, which are not typically union jobs. More people are not working in trades, which is unfortunate because we have need in these. And right now we don't have a low unemployment rate, or we do have a low unemployment rate, but that does not drive union membership. Employers standing against higher wages does drive union membership. Which of the following statements is correct? Mediators have the authority to make binding decisions in labor disputes. Arbitrators have authority to make binding decisions in labor disputes. Both mediators and arbitrators have authority to make binding decisions in labor disputes, or neither mediators nor arbitrators have the authority to make binding decisions in labor disputes. Which is correct? B is correct. Generally speaking, arbitrators are voluntary, arbitrators are mandatory, mediators are voluntary. I'm even messing up this morning with my own speech. Guys, the Johns Hopkins nurses, which we talked about last week, did a pretty good job of pleading their case in the court of public opinion. How did they get on the right side of the public? This is a fill-in-the-blank question. When they were talking about what their demands were, what were they at?
They put forth the concern for patients first and the care that they're giving.
They didn't mention finances or money in any of their demands. They were all talking about taking better care of people. That's a good way to win in the court of public opinion. A strong economy and a low unemployment rate make it what kind of market? Is it an employee's market, an employer's market, a union market, or a competitive market? It's an employee's market. You are correct, because you can have leverage over the employer because they can't expand because they're running out of people. True or false? Unions were strong proponents of NAFTA. That is false. And Elliot, why is that false?
That's because NAFTA made it easier for jobs to relocate from Mexico and Canada.
That's exactly correct. The percentage of employees represented by unions has reduced by how much since 1980? From 1980 to 2014, how much has the percentage of union membership gone down? Is it 12%, 25% union, or competitive? Take a guess. The answer is, oh, what the heck? There it is. It's actually 12%. So I at least limited the amount of numbers that you had to go past. So true or false? Companies can pay employees to listen to anti-union speeches. Is that true or false? True. It is true. Absolutely true. That is one of the biggest bits of leverage, by the way, the companies have over unions, and the fact that they have a captive audience. There is nothing to prohibit you from saying, hey, everybody, we're having a required assembly today. We're going to tell you why the company is treating you so well. They can't come out right and say, we're going to tell you why you don't want a union. That's bordering on unfair labor practices, but they can certainly tell you why you have it good. That's something that plenty of employers do. So that being said, guys, that was our review because Chapter 1 was just starting in. We are, however, going to start our Labor Day today by talking about a lady named Sarah Nelson. If you haven't seen this lady before, Sarah Nelson works as a flight attendant, and she's also becoming the face of the modern labor movement. This is a person who may actually be up for national office in the AFL-CIO, which is the largest conglomerate of unions in the country. I want you to watch this. It's about an 8-minute video. It was on CBS this weekend, and I think it does a pretty good job of capturing the way and shape of unions in 2019 and beyond are starting to change much in the video. But no offense to anybody's singing voice. But guys, before I ask you some questions about this, any reactions? Any reactions to this video and the changing face of labor? What's different from this person compared to maybe some of the traditional views of unions and labor and the labor movement we may have held? Any thoughts? I honestly was really surprised to see somebody from this industry rising to prominence as a leader potentially for other unions. I mean, when we think about unions, what are the typical industries we think about? Teachers for sure. Teachers are a big union. Who else? Nursing, healthcare, and if we go back to the lineage, we think about steel workers, we think about coal miners. The idea that a new leader might be coming from an industry that's not typically associated with a typical powerful union place, although maybe it's just something we haven't been looking at. Elliot, you look like you want to say something.
Well, when I worked in the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, one of my assignments was to make a stakeholder list of all these different groups. And being that T&I also has, air traffic committees, I had to work specifically with that guy, and I'm pretty sure I had a list of 40 stakeholders, and I'd say about out of the 40, 30 of them were different unions regarding pilots, flight assistants, people that worked on the planes, and then there are also some companies as well. So, I mean, there are a lot of unions when it comes to air.
Oh, for sure. And the thing that was interesting to me is how quietly some of these groups are holding some very powerful positions. I mean, honestly, full disclosure, until I saw this interview with her, I had never heard the story about essentially the flight attendants and the traffic controllers coming together to say, we're going to force McConnell's hand on this thing. I mean, I knew we'd come to a compromise. I didn't know that this was part of it. Now, when they mentioned the AFL-CIO, we haven't talked about the AFL-CIO yet. The AFL-CIO is essentially the union of unions. So basically all major unions, although there are some groups that are not affiliated, really come together to try to coordinate their bargaining processes. The idea of a female being president of the AFL-CIO it would have almost been unthinkable in the 20th century. So that's a big move there as well. What else did you guys notice from this video? Anything else that jumped out at you? What about the part about Ronald Reagan and the air traffic controllers? This was before your time. But guys, check this out. Essentially, Ronald Reagan, his first year in office, 1981, his first major conflict with organized labor was the traffic controllers. The traffic controllers, basically the people who sit in towers and make sure our planes don't collide, decided they were unhappy with their working conditions. Now, this group of workers had signed what we refer to as a no-strike clause, meaning that no matter what, they were not walking off the job. Can you understand why that might be important? Why might the government have insisted on that clause in that industry? What do you think? Help me out here, guys. Help me not give you a test. Yes.
Because without air traffic controllers, you got planes bumping into each other.
It's a pretty vital industry. So one of Reagan's first challenges on the job was people who said, because of the nature of our industry, we're not going to strike. And they went on strike. So what was Reagan's response? You're fired. We're going to get rid of all of you guys, and we're going to replace you with non-union people because you broke your own contract. That was a very powerful statement, not just for Reagan as a president, but as the tone for organized labor in the 1980s. We refer to it as Reagan breaking the unions. That's a very important thing to remember, considering what was happening economically in this country between the 1970s and 1980s. What industries were in decline? What do you think, guys? We used to make things in a region like coal for sure. What else?
Steel.
You got it. Big industry. So we're talking about very powerful union strongholds are in decline, and at the same time, Reagan is coming in and doing deregulation and breaking the union here. So that was a very important statement for organized labor. What this particular person, what Sarah is saying, Sarah Nelson, is it's time for labor to get back on track with the idea of really having leverage over employers. Can she do it? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how people react to her outside of her industry, considering she's such a non-traditional player. I think it's exciting time for females in these kinds of industries to say that they can rise into positions of prominence and leadership as well. Other thoughts, guys, before we jump in for today? Yes?
The AFL-CIO, so is that like a broad organization that represents a wide variety of different unions?
The AFL-CIO, and we're going to talk about them at length, is basically a union of unions. So, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the history and organization of unions. But think about it this way. We've got AFL-CIO, and they have unions all across the country that are members of the AFL-CIO. Why would you, if you were a union, why would you want to go to a group of unions who coordinates between unions? What possible advantage could it have for you? Yes?
Might have more experience and expertise.
Yes, we can get experience, we can get expertise. What else? Okay, let's put it this way. We've got you guys over here are in the United Auto Workers, and you guys over here are in the United Steel Workers. You're doing equivalent work in terms of effort. The auto workers, what are you guys making an hour? Give me a number. You guys are making $30 an hour to start with. You guys in your industry are making $22 an hour. How do you feel about that?
Not good.
Yeah, especially if you find out these guys are making $30 an hour with the same kind of skills. So you go for information to find out what kind of bargaining leverage do we have. You might also want to make sure that you're not stepping on each other's toes. For example, the United Mine Workers of America, who you're going to meet Jim Lamont here in about a week or so, the United Mine Workers of America don't just represent miners anymore. They represent other businesses. So you have unions competing with other unions to represent employees, meaning that a group like the AFL-CIO helps those unions coordinate so they're not stepping on each other's toes. I'll give you another example. The United Steelworkers, actually, you're going to have a guest speaker coming in who deals with the United Steelworkers from a management perspective. They represent shipping ports in Lake Erie. Why would the steelworkers represent people who work on ships? What does one have to do with the other?
Ships are made of steel.
They are. But you're close, but no cigar. What is it? EJ, what do you think? Any idea at all? Why would a ship union be represented by a steelworkers union? Any idea? Yes?
They gotta be able to ship the steel.
That's exactly right. And so when we were shipping lots of steel between Canada and the United States, the people who worked in those ships also became members of that union, which could theoretically compete with other mariners' unions. So the reason you have groups like the AFL-CIO is so that people learn how to play with each other in terms of making sure they're not stepping on each other's toes. Guys, today what we're going to be jumping into is a bit of the history of the labor movement. We're going to be showing a few videos through this as well to really get you in. Guys, in terms of the historical perspective, we really had two competing things. We had the interest of management and we had the interest of individuals. And we're going to see where labor really came into the equation. Guys, Until the later 1800s, early 1900s, in many parts of the world, including the United States, unions were illegal. You were not allowed to collectively bargain. So the reason that we look at this stuff, we also want to look at how unions became financially solvent. How do we come to a point where we could actually work within our governments to ensure people had the right to organize? That's some of the history we're going to be talking about. We're also going to be talking about the idea of how union leaders are able to really appeal to people from a financial standpoint, saying this can economically be in your benefit. So that's what we're talking about when we look at how effective unions are. Now, guys, in terms of where we started, the Industrial Revolution is really where unions started to take hold. Guys, who in their own words can tell me what happened in the United States during the Industrial Revolution? What was happening, guys? Prior to the Industrial Revolution, what was the main economy in the United States? What did it function upon? I'm sorry? It was not cars, not before the Industrial Revolution. Who can tell me? Yes.
Agricultural.
It was agricultural. People farmed essentially to make enough to eat. And then when they have enough to eat and enough to store, they could start selling it. And then people could specialize. And then we got into automation, and all of a sudden mass manufacturing came in. Guys, in the United States, in 2019, do we have a larger, how do I want to phrase this? Do we have a larger concentration of people in cities or rural areas? Cities, for sure, because there's jobs. People came to the cities to work in factories. Those factories, to get supplies in and out, we needed roads. So roads, underground plumbing, sewer systems, all these things happened in large part due to the Industrial Revolution. Now here's what happened though. Because we've got machines that are doing a big part of the work, if I'm hiring people, I don't need carpenters. I don't need tradesmen. I don't need people with massive amounts of skill. I need bodies who can pull switches and operate machinery. As it happened, people are migrating into the cities to work in very risky jobs for very low pay because no real skills were required. And if you fell down and got hurt, there was probably somebody else who could do your job. On top of that, guys, there wasn't much to protect you if you were working in these areas. Next class, I'm going to show you the pictures I've been telling you about children working in the mines, the steel mills, and the looms, the places we're making textile products. It was not a comfortable or fun existence, but that's what powered the Industrial Revolution. So in terms of the way the law worked at that point in time, the law was very biased toward employers. In other words, I own the factory. You have made the choice to come work for me. You can accept what I'm offering. Is there anything that's making people come from rural areas to work in my factory? Are they being compelled to do so? No. And what the perspective of the government was at that point was that it is in the best interest of employers to be able to have the right to make a profit. And therefore, if you try unionizing, if you try getting up and bullying an employer, we're going to break it. We're going to break your union. We had what we refer to as criminal conspiracy doctrine. This is a very important concept. I would write this down or remember. Criminal conspiracy doctrine means it's illegal to get together and conspire against an employer. What this could mean, for example, is the idea if all of you guys are saying, Tonkin, you need to be paying us $12 an hour, we're walking out the door. You're ganging up on me. It's a conspiracy. You guys met and did not allow me to have liberty to run my company as I see fit. And that was referred to as criminal conspiracy doctrine. Now, guys, that persisted through much of the 19th century. Now, what's the difference between a criminal or a civil conspiracy? Well, criminal conspiracy means you are conspiring to break the law. A civil conspiracy means you're conspiring to do something that on its face might not be illegal, but the effect on me is intolerable. So, for example, the original thought that unions were illegal meant that if you were trying to unionize, that was a criminal conspiracy. A lesser charge is this is a civil conspiracy, meaning that what you're doing inherently isn't wrong if we legalize unions, but you still are doing me irreparable harm, and I have the right to collect damages from you. So one on its face is illegal flat out, which is criminal. Civil is not necessarily illegal on its face. That's an important distinction to make, because we get into civil conspiracy doctrine. What we're talking about basically is the idea the people who are allowed to organize could still do harm to companies. What this comes down to, guys, is the law was biased for the factory owners, for the big business people, and not for the working person. Now, this changed somewhat. There's Commonwealth versus Hunt, which is a very seminal case, which essentially said, okay, if you want to organize, it is not a criminal conspiracy. You're allowed to organize, but it still can be tried as a civil conspiracy if you're doing undue harm to employers. And what basically the employers were using as leverage, by taking these cases to court and by getting juries who were on their side, they were able to essentially decide cases in their favor. Now, they were able to issue injunctions both ways. If I talk about a court of law, when I say an injunction, what do I mean? What's a court injunction? It's a legal term. Has anybody heard the term before? What a court injunction means is basically the court is coming in and saying, you cannot do this. We're issuing an injunction, so you have to stop what you're doing. This law, this Commonwealth versus Hunt, basically allowed courts to use injunctions to stop unfair acts for both labor and management, but it still tended to favor management and civil decisions. This part of stuff's a little dry, guys, but it's important that you understand the differences between the two. Do you guys understand the difference between criminal and civil so far? Are we good? Okay. Guys, in terms of breach of contract and the labor injunction, what this basically meant is that if you chose to breach of contract, meaning an implied contract would be I'm paying you $12 an hour to do this job. You choosing to bargain with other people to try to leverage for more money could indicate a breach of contract, in which case you could actually be locked out of your company. That's a term that came into vogue when we started talking about unions themselves. During this time, for example, it was very common for companies to ask people to sign what they referred to as a yellow dog contract. I won't call on you, but has anybody heard the term yellow dog before? Okay, what a yellow dog contract meant, Ryan, I'm paying you $12 an hour. You sign in this piece of paper that you will not join or start a labor union working at my company. Legislation back in those days didn't really have much to say about it until we got into this particular period of time, about 1806 to 1931. Guys, in terms of labor injunctions, they basically tended to favor employers, but at times we started seeing some decisions being made. Now, the common law doctrine that was also coming into place at this point in time also indicated in all states employment was at will. When I say that employment is at will, it means the employer or the employee can terminate that relationship at any point in time. Yellow dog contracts are no longer legal in the United States, but they were at this point in time. This got us into what we refer to, and there's a couple other cases we're going to get into here today, guys. Who has ever heard the term antitrust? Okay, Corey, do you know what antitrust means?
I just remember like some act, you know,
Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about, the Sherman Antitrust Act. Antitrust in general means that a system is rigged and set up in such a way where somebody cannot compete. We hear the word antitrust applied to monopolies, for example. There have been lawsuits that have been against companies like Google and Microsoft saying it's antitrust. To use a non-labor example, what might be a reason, for example, we would say Google is guilty of antitrust violations? In 2019, raise your hand if you use Google as your primary search engine. Yes, we have nearly 100% in here. What that means is we got a company that has an unfair advantage and can leverage the markets. So the original Sherman Antitrust Act back in 1890 meant that basically we're trying to get rid of monopolies and make sure that one company could not dominate the market. And a lot of companies at this point, let's say for example, I'm Microsoft. If I own all the employment in this region and you guys can't unionize, you're really over a barrel. You're either going to work for me for what I'm willing to pay you, or you're going to not work at all. So that was one thing that was happening. So that was a blow actually towards supporting labor. It was a blow to industry because we were saying we're going to take a step against monopolies. Now the Danbury Hatters case, for example, starts pushing some of these laws as well. And it basically said if a labor organization used a boycott or a strike, that it was essentially violating good faith and basically you could not go on strike. It was really coming down to the idea of not supporting unions. It was pushing against unions. So on one hand, you have a blow to injury, which is the Sherman Antitrust Act. On the other hand, you have the Supreme Court basically saying if a company or a union goes on strike, they're doing damages to a company. So in terms of the Clayton Act of 1914, that's whenever we get into some legislation swinging in favor of unions, basically saying that injunctions can only be used to keep people from damaging property. Let me give you some context for that. What that basically meant is you could peaceably assemble and you could strike so long as you weren't doing damage to property. So this part of things, guys, we're talking about the Sherman Antitrust breaking up monopolies. We're talking about the Danbury Hatters case basically saying that you cannot use a boycott to hurt a business. But then you've got the Clayton Act coming out basically saying so long as you're not intending to do financial harm or intending to do damage to a business, you're okay to assemble and to peaceably strike. Questions so far? I know we're talking about a lot of history here today, guys, but this is important stuff. We're stopping right now for our first question or comment of the day. I would like a question or comment from somewhere in there. About anything, guys. Who has a question they would like to ask? Sir. I'm incredibly excited for it. I think Joaquin Phoenix is going to kill it. He's not going to be any Heath Ledger, but let's not compare him. Let's let him do his own thing. What do you think?
I agree. I'm excited.
Yeah. Looks pretty psychotic.
Trailer looks really good.
Trailer looks exceptional. Early reviews are good. One other question or comment, guys. Remember, participation is part of your grade. May I have a question or comment, please? Sir.
What do you think about Spider-Man?
Here's what I predict is going to happen. One of two things. Either we're going to get a really awesome villain movie with Carnage and Venom, because Disney won't touch that stuff. They won't go that dark. And that could be good for Spider-Man. The other thing could happen is Disney will say, screw Sony and just buy them. And we'll pull them back in. Which do you want to see happen? You want to stay with Marvel? I want them in the MCU too, but I would kill to see a super dark Carnage movie. Like, I would love to see that part of the Spider Universe. So if they would let this fester for like 2 more years and then pull them back in, that'd be perfect for me. We'll see what happens. Good question. Guys, when we start talking about organized labor really getting their act together, we cannot talk about this without talking about the Knights of Labor. They're called the KOL. These guys started off as essentially a society of kind of virtues, the idea of elevating people. The idea of, instead of just saying we're after wages and improvements for our financial systems, these guys were actually after improving people in general. They wanted to make people more enlightened. They wanted safer working conditions, but this wasn't a real union in terms of modern perceptions, because if you were management, if you're part of the company, you could also be a part of this union. Now, they had some early successes. They were able to get people from companies to contribute to some reforms, safer working conditions, better mass production conditions, all these things. They would ultimately fail in the long run. However, we're going to finish our class today with a brief video about what these guys were all trying to earn: better rights for its employees, safer working conditions, better wages, but more or less working conditions. They were actually pushing for some good reforms at the time. The fact that they were representing people of color and women as well was something you did not commonly see in labor unions during that point in time, people who were organizing. What would ultimately be their downfall, however, was they were not willing to really take a stand against management because people from management were part of the organization. At times, they came across more as working groups from within companies than a labor union per se. So that being said, guys, we're going to pick this up there on Wednesday. Before you go, however, remember, your first paper for this class, your 2 to 3 sentences about unions, is due when? Wednesday. You got to have 2 sources in there to go along with your opinion. Make sure to do that. If you haven't done that yet, make sure you get that done before you do anything else this week. We'll see you back here on Wednesday.